From Phil Schneider to Dorothy Killigan to the more recent Max Spears, all of them and many others all had one thing in common. They got too close to the truth. And in this video, you're going to learn some of the disturbing truths behind the cover-ups that exist surrounding their deaths and the intelligence they wanted to expose. You don't want to miss this one. In the 1990s, Phil Schneider, who was an American engineer, began to share some truly bizarre claims about his alleged experiences with aliens, UFOs, and government cover-ups. Now, let me make a note real quick that Phil Schneider had an impressive background. I mean, he wasn't just some schmuck hired by the government. No. He was an engineer, geologist, demolition specialist, and civil engineer who had worked for both the military and aerospace industries. And so, when he started talking about his supposed involvement in the construction of this secret underground military base, or should I say bases, people took notice. Now, Schneider claimed that he had actually been assigned to work at the Dulce base in New Mexico, and it was there that he said he had encountered all sorts of strange and shocking things. And according to Schneider, as his team was drilling down into the earth to expand the base, they accidentally stumbled upon an existing alien base hidden deep underground, and then that's when all hell broke loose. Schneider described it as a massacre. He claimed that this large cavern, they found themselves face to face with big greys, or a type of extraterrestrial being. Now, in the chaos that would ensue, Schneider said he actually killed two of the aliens, but the incident left him with severe burns from their alleged energy weapons, including missing a few fingers, and supposedly the radiation from these weapons alone would later give him cancer. Now, despite this violent first encounter, Schneider claimed that the US government would eventually reach this sort of truce with these Zeta Reticuli, or Greys as you know them. Now, they supposedly signed a treaty he called the Greta Agreement, which led to Dulce serving as a kind of secret facility to house the aliens, their technology, and of course to conduct genetic and mind control experiments on human beings, as horrific as that is. Then, Schneider went into great detail about the layout of the base, describing 7 levels that held everything from living quarters and storage for alien craft to laboratories and meeting halls. He even claimed that many of our everyday technologies, as well as advanced military technology, kind of like stealth, was actually developed with the help of these extraterrestrials. But the story continues to twist. Schneider alleged that the aliens, at some point or another, had broken the treaty, and that the disagreements often turned violent. He believed the Greys were actually plotting to overthrow the government and install a new world order that would later be controlled by the UN, which they had secretly infiltrated. But that's not all, folks. Schneider even spoke of 7 benevolent alien species and 4 evil ones here on Earth, leading to the development of a resistance movement. And so he tied major events like nuclear testing and terrorist bombings to attempts to wipe out these rogue alien bases or the use of alien technology. As a matter of fact, he would actually say this: "I was involved in the expansion of the deep underground military base at Dulce, which is possibly the deepest base. It descends 7 levels and is over 2.5 miles deep. At this time, we were drilling 4 different wells in the desert, intending to tie them together, but this required blasting. My job was to go deep into the wells, research the characteristics of the black rocks, and recommend the explosives that would be suitable in each case. However, as we made our way down, we found ourselves in a large cavern that was full of extraterrestrial aliens known as the Big Greys. I killed 2 of them. At that time, there were about 30 people there, and 40 more came there later when it all started. They were all killed. We were surprised by the existence of an entire underground base filled with aliens. Later, we learned that they have been living on our planet for a long time. In my opinion, this can explain a lot of what is behind the theory of ancient astronauts. In his lectures, Schneider had made these bold claims about the US government possessing an earthquake-causing device, as well as AIDS being a man-made biological weapon that was simply created in a lab and actually used a mix of human and humanoid glandular secretions. Now, you have to remember that at the time in the 90s when he started really coming out with all this stuff, it was extremely controversial. And to many, they sounded like the ravings of a madman. He would add this, though. The federal government currently has an earthquake-causing device. I'm a geologist, and I know what I'm talking about. During the earthquake in Kobe, Japan, there was no pulse wave, as is usually the case in normal earthquakes. She wasn't there. In 1989, there was an earthquake in San Francisco, and there was no pulse wave or anything like that either. This is a Tesla device that is being used for evil purposes. Shadow budget programs distort the essence of science as we know it. Look at AIDS. It was created by government order in a laboratory in Chicago, Illinois in 1972. It was a biological weapon that was used against the people of the United States. I know this because I have seen the documentation of the Office of Strategic Services, which, by the way, is still working to this day through the CDC in Atlanta. They use the glandular secretions of animals, humans, and humanoids to create a virus. These humanoids have friendly relations with the government. There is absolutely no defense against what they create. It is a biological weapon with potentially dire consequences. Every alien on our planet must be isolated. Unfortunately, things would take a dark turn for Schneider. On January 17, 1996, Phil Schneider was found dead in his Oregon home under extremely suspicious circumstances. His neck was wrapped with piano wire and his catheter tube, and there were signs of torture. And many of his followers believed he had simply just been silenced because of what he had been revealing to the public over time. Now, although the official cause of death was that he committed suicide, makes sense, right? Interestingly, Schneider had actually previously claimed his life was in danger and that a whopping 11 other people with similar knowledge to him had also been killed under very mysterious circumstances, their deaths also labeled suicides. Now, the details around some of these cases, like that of Ron Rummel, who was a former Air Force intelligence officer, definitely raised some eyebrows. Now, Rummel was found shot in the head, but there was no blood on the gun, there was no fingerprints on the weapon, and a suicide note written by a left-handed person, despite him being right-handed. But again, makes total sense, right? Because, in his suicidal craze, he must have suddenly discovered how to write left-handed, in addition to cleanly opting himself out. All that aside, it begs the question, what really happened to Phil Schneider? We know what happened, but was he just silenced because he knew too much, or was he maybe just a government psyop who had outlived his usefulness, or was he simply a deranged and delusional individual whose death was truly as strange as his life? And more importantly, was there any real truth at all to any of his tales of underground bases and alien treaties and government cover-ups, or was it all just some elaborate fiction born from a troubled mind? well, we may never know the full truth behind his incredible story. As far as the alleged alien base under Dulce, the secret treaties with extraterrestrials, the earthquake machines, and I didn't even get into the Great War of 1979, which I'll have to do in a separate video, and the supposed assassinations of UFO whistleblowers, well, folks, as of now, it all remains a mystery. On June 24, 1967, Frank Edwards was scheduled to attend an important conference on UFOs called the Conference of Scientific Ufologists, and he was a member of the Board of Governors for the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, or NICAP for short. Now, at the time, this was a very well-known man in the community, so people were very excited to see him here and to have him speak and share information at this conference. Frank also had a popular radio show and writings which brought the topic of UFOs to a huge audience at a time when it was still a very unpopular subject, to say the least. He even gave a platform to early whistleblowers like Donald Kehoe, who claimed the government was hiding the truth about extraterrestrial visitation, among a host of other things. And so, as you can imagine, this didn't exactly sit well with those high up in the chain. Frank undoubtedly ruffled some feathers. Also, Frank was only 59 years old at the time and was in relatively good health. He exercised quite a bit, ate well, and never had any serious health issues. I think you know where this is going. Unfortunately, as the story goes, as Frank went to bed and laid his head down on his pillow for the night, he had no idea that he would never wake up again. So when his wife found him responsive in bed just before midnight, you could imagine her total and complete shock and devastation at the matter. And after frantically calling 911, the paramedics had arrived, but there was nothing they could do. Frank Edwards was pronounced dead, seemingly of a heart attack, which, at 59 years old can happen, sure, but the night before the conference, interesting. Now, the timing of Frank's death immediately raised eyebrows in the community, and rightfully so. A lot of that was also because June 24th was a very significant date. It was the anniversary of pilot Kenneth Arnold's famous UFO sighting that had kicked off the modern era of ufology all the way back in 1947. And so the fact that Frank had died on the eve of this important conference, scheduled for that very date, just seemed beyond coincidence to many. And in fact, in the days following Frank's death, more suspicious details began to come out. Now, you'll find this interesting. The popular late-night radio host Long John Nebel came forward claiming that he had been shown 2 unsigned letters before the conference, both of which stated that Frank would not live to see the end of it. And even more ominously, Nebel said he received a phone call from UFO author Gray Barker, who claimed a mysterious stranger had called him in the middle of the night and flatly stated that Frank would not make it to the conference before abruptly hanging up. Now, clearly there was some sort of orchestration going on behind the scenes, wasn't there? Now, despite these strange events, Frank's death was officially attributed to just a heart attack. Again, he was 59, it could totally happen, but no autopsy was ever conducted and there was no further investigation. Now, for those who knew Frank and were a part of the close-knit UFO research community at this time, his sudden death, especially being the night before he was supposed to go on and speak, definitely reeked of a cover-up. Now again, Frank had been one of the most prominent and outspoken figures in ufology at the time. Some believed he was actually silenced by nefarious forces who were working behind the scenes to keep information regarding the UFOs from ever hitting the public, or at least as much of the public as it could. They simply felt that Frank was getting too close to the truth and he was exposing too much. Clearly, someone or something wanted him out of the picture permanently. But who exactly this somebody could be remained a mystery. Was it a singular person, perhaps a governing entity, perhaps a global cabal working to maintain order and secrecy? We don't know. But Frank's case was not to be the last suspicious death to rock the UFO research community. No. Far from it. Because just a few years prior, in 1959, astronomer and UFO author Morris K. Jessup was found dead in his car of apparent carbon monoxide poisoning. Jessup, too, had a high profile in the UFO field with his writings on UFOs and even theories talking about ancient astronauts. And he was also connected to the infamous Philadelphia experiment, which was an alleged secret military project that involved the teleportation of a naval ship that Jessup believed to be linked to UFO technology. And so by 1959, Jessup had fallen on hard times, and unfortunately for him, his unorthodox UFO theories had severely damaged his academic standing, and he was just really struggling with depression after his marriage fell apart and a car accident left him injured. I mean, for Jessup, when it rained, it certainly poured. And in April of that year, he was suddenly found dead in his car in a case that was quickly ruled a suicide. However, the details just don't add up. Now, it appeared as if somebody had placed the exhaust hose into Jessup's car window using wet towels, implying it was done from outside the vehicle. But if Jessup intended to take his own life, I mean, why would he have it set up that way rather than just simply doing it from inside the car? And why did the police refrain from a proper autopsy, which, by the way, was required by Florida law? Gee, I wonder who made that call. This clearly seemed like an attempt to sweep what would look like a suspicious death cleanly under the rug as quickly as possible. But unfortunately, there's really no definitive proof it was anything other than what was written down on paper, and that's a suicide. So when looking at the cases of Frank Edwards and Morris K. Jessup side by side, I mean, it's hard not to see that there's a disturbing pattern, both where these prominent researchers who died under questionable circumstances at best, all right when their work was gaining significant traction and influence. And in both situations, police and other authorities were actually very quick to write their deaths off as natural or even self-inflicted, despite numerous suspicious details and any lack of an investigation. I mean, does that make you wonder at all? No? So, does that mean that Edwards and Jessup were just victims of some insidious plot to silence those who got too close to the truth? Did they pay the ultimate price for trying to bring out hidden information to light? It seems that there really is a price to pay for digging too deep into the UFO and supernatural phenomena, and unfortunately, many pay with their lives when they find things out they shouldn't. Now, as far as the seemingly healthy Frank Edwards just suddenly dropping dead of an alleged heart attack on the eve of a major conference, the unsigned letters predicting his demise, the mysterious phone call, the lack of any autopsy on Morris K. Jessup, and the strange wet towels outside his car, it all unfortunately remains inconclusive. In 1965, Dorothy Mae Kilgallen was a highly respected and sought-after journalist living in Manhattan, and she had built a successful career as a columnist covering show business and rubbing elbows with celebrities like Marilyn Monroe and others. In fact, her column, The Voice of Broadway, was actually syndicated in over 140 papers, and she was a regular panelist on the popular television game show What's My Line? Now, this is a woman who had made it. She was living the high life. But things would soon take a turn for Dorothy. Now, interestingly, she decided at one point to cover the 1954 murder trial of Dr. Sam Shepard, who was accused of killing his wife in their suburban Cleveland home. Now, she became deeply invested in the case, and her coverage had gained national attention, but that wasn't the only high-profile story Dorothy found herself entangled in at the time. She was also an outspoken skeptic of the Warren Commission's report on President Kennedy's assassination and Jack Ruby's shooting of Lee Oswald. And so, just by that alone, her bold stance on these controversial topics made her a very obvious target for those who preferred to keep certain information quiet. But Dorothy refused to ever stop and found herself increasingly drawn into uncovering the truth regarding UFOs. In fact, she would even make a statement to the press regarding UFOs saying this: "Flying saucers are regarded as of such vital importance that they will be the subject of a special hush-hush meeting of the world military heads next summer." And so, using her clout and connections of political and celebrity contacts, she began to dig deep into places that she probably shouldn't have, all in search for the truth behind UFOs. She would spend hours just digging and trying to find anything she could regarding insider information regarding this topic. But then something happened. Now, I don't know if that she learned of something that had deeply disturbed her, or maybe she was just intent on getting all the information out there. We'll never know for sure, but she made a disturbing declaration to the public in a press statement. She said this: "I can report today on a story which is positively spooky, not to mention chilling. British scientists and airmen, after examining the wreckage of one mysterious flying ship, are convinced these strange aerial objects are not optical illusions or Soviet inventions, but are flying saucers which originate on another planet." Now, Dorothy's source was a high-ranking British official who wished to remain anonymous. Now, obviously, anyone outing this information at this time so publicly, like Dorothy had, well, the implications were deep. Now, Dorothy reported that these scientists believed that these saucers were actually piloted by beings under 4 feet tall, and that such advanced technology could never have originated on our planet. And she also revealed that the British government was withholding a very official report on the examination of a flying saucer wreckage, possibly to avoid public panic. Now, I just want to say here that if you think about the public panic angle, I mean, it can totally make sense. Can you imagine if this information got out to the public in that time period? Just the complete civil unrest, the anarchy that would ensue globally for the general public to learn that the government had actually been concealing this kind of knowledge and all of it was true. I mean, at a time where the public trusting the government was a pretty big deal, yeah, it would have caused some ripples. Now, despite the incredible nature of her claims, Dorothy firmly stood by her story. It's just sad that, well, she had no idea that her pursuit of the truth would lead to the last chapter of her life. On November 8th, 1965, Dorothy was discovered dead in her Manhattan townhouse, sitting in a bed she rarely used, wearing clothes she didn't typically sleep in, and with a book she had already finished nearby. And so police quickly swooped in, said that her death was obviously a suicide by drug overdose, and that because her cause of death was so obvious that no autopsy was necessary, and everything was just quickly swept under the rug. Boom, it was done. Now, I'm no Einstein here, but is it just me, or was this whole situation a wee bit, I don't know, maybe suspicious? And so soon after, so many theories on the cause of Dorothy's death started to come out. And there were some that had speculated that she had somehow made powerful enemies through her coverage of the mob and the Kennedy assassination, and just her whole stance on that. Others would point to her involvement in releasing sensitive UFO information as a possible motive for killing her, but because everything was so quickly swept under the rug, well, we don't really have the meat and potatoes of the information we need to make a definitive conclusion about what happened. The truth remains elusive to this day. And sadly, Dorothy's story is just one of many individuals who come out to the public when they try to unveil the truth. As far as the strange circumstances of her final moments, the bizarre UFO revelations she brought to light from her research, and the anonymous British military intelligence, and the potential motives behind her tragic death, I mean, was it mob related? Was it UFO related? We don't know. It all remains one big mystery. Now, The cases I've shared with you so far are probably some of the more notable cases in that you could do your own digging and just find hours and hours of research. And so these next two sections will also go over more conspiracies that took place that have less information on them in general, but anyway, they should suffice. Now let's fast forward to the 1970s, and it seems those who had an interest in ufology would face this strange wave of death that would just blanket everything. High-profile deaths just began popping off like crazy, and it makes you wonder if there was some sort of active campaign at the time to silence anyone wielding the torch of truth. Specifically, let's go to the start of where this section, where it all truly began, in 1971 with a Dr. James McDonald, who at the time was a very well-respected physicist at the University of Arizona and had become a vocal advocate for more serious studies into the entirety of the UFO phenomenon. Now, Dr. McDonald was a man on a mission. He was convinced that UFOs were very real and an important issue that deserved far more attention and investigation than it was currently getting. And so he took it upon himself to actually try and persuade the US Congress to take a closer look at the matter. But sadly, his efforts were cut short when he was found dead from a gunshot wound to the head, an apparent suicide. Wow, shocker. Bet you guys didn't see that one coming. And just 2 years later in 1973, the UFO community was dealt yet another blow with the passing of Ivan T. Sanderson, who was another major beloved cryptozoologist and UFO enthusiast. Now, quick note for those who aren't familiar with his work, I've actually used a lot of his research and work in my own content, so if any of this is interesting to you, you guys should totally go and check out his stuff. Now, Sanderson had always been a larger-than-life figure. I mean, he was known for his curiosity and just infectious enthusiasm regarding all things strange and unexplained, but despite his seemingly robust health, he was suddenly struck down by a very unusually fast-spreading cancer that ultimately took his life in a matter of weeks. And this is, as it turns out, would just be this reoccurring theme in the deaths of many UFO researchers over the years to come. These strangely aggressive cancers and tumors that seem to come out of nowhere and progress at an alarming rate. It was almost as if something or someone was targeting these individuals, picking them off one by one. Now, fast forward into 1980, and we would see more and more deaths happen. Take Dr. Alan J. Hynek, for example, who passed in 1986. Now, Hynek was actually a towering figure in the world of UFO research, having served as a major consultant and investigator for the US Air Force's Project Blue Book. This was a guy who knew stuff, and during just a standard routine surgery, the doctors would make this horrific discovery. He had a highly aggressive brain tumor, which would go on to quickly claim his life. Now, interestingly, in the days leading up to his death, Hynek had apparently discovered some deep, profound, and disturbing information regarding UFOs. Unfortunately, nobody knows what though, because he died before he ever got the chance to share it publicly or even privately. Now, this is only ever known because before he died, he had spoken to some friends and colleagues about this, hinting that he had stumbled onto something big. But whatever it was, he took it with him to the grave. Unfortunately, we'll never know, but it seems possible he did die as a result of learning that information. Now, just 2 years later in 1988, Mae Brussel, a groundbreaking radio host known for her fearless explorations of the strange and the sinister, also passed away. Now, Brussel had made a name for herself with her hard-hitting radio program, Dialogue Conspiracy, which would be later renamed to World Watchers International, but like so many others, she was cut down in her prime by a fast-acting cancer. Fast forward again to the year 1993, and an astronaut by the name of Dickie Slayton, who was known to have insider knowledge about UFOs, also died of an aggressive cancer just before he was set to come forward with what he knew. And the following year, Ann Livingston, who was also an investigator for the Mutual UFO Network, or MUFON, succumbed to a brutal form of ovarian cancer only a mere 2 years after claiming to have been harassed by the Men in Black. Now, for those that don't know, Men in Black are these strange, mysterious individuals who are said to be government agents or even aliens themselves, commonly seen dressed in black suits and sunglasses, and they intimidate and silence UFO witnesses or whistleblowers. But it wasn't just cancer that seemed to be taking the lives of these researchers. Heart attacks were also a common cause of death among those with ties to UFOs. A perfect example is Ron Johnson, who had been an Air Force officer with ties to Project Blue Book and was the deputy director of investigations for MUFON when he died suddenly and strangely. After giving a slide presentation at a conference in Austin, Texas, Johnson was found slumped over in a seat, and as the lights came up, blood was trickling from his nose, his face was purple, and of course, as everybody saw this, they went crazy, they started panicking, they called 911, they tried reviving him, did everything they could, but unfortunately, efforts to bring him back were in vain. He was gone. In 1996, a UFO author named Carla Turner also passed away from breast cancer, believed to be linked to her alien encounters and controversial writings in the subject. Similarly, in 1999, Jim Keith, another prolific author on UFOs and conspiracies, died from a blood clot during leg surgery. By the way, there are many more deaths in individuals who I haven't even mentioned yet, but these are just some of them. And it makes you wonder that, is there a darker conspiracy at play, or what is going on exactly? Are there powerful forces working on actively silencing those who threaten to expose the truth about UFOs? I mean, what is happening between the suicides, the quick-acting cancers, and all of it being linked to people who heavily research this bizarre topic of ufology? I mean, you can't help but wonder if there's something going on. Unfortunately for now, it all remains a big mystery. This section is really just a continuation of the last, but we're going to actually go ahead and move into some of the more modern day post-2000s deaths regarding conspiracies and UFOs. And so in April of 2001, another very prolific author who was very well known for his work regarding the unexplained would suddenly pass away. And his name was Ron Bonds, and his death was actually ruled as a result of food poisoning bacterium. Now, interestingly, food poisoning generally doesn't kill you, but for some reason, Mr. Bonds' case was one in which it claimed his life. Now, I should note here real quick and say that it's actually estimated that roughly 600 million people every year get sick from contaminated food, but that only 0.05%, which is still around 300,000 people, so that's still a lot, only ever die as a result of the food poisoning. So it's possible that Bonds was just one of the unlucky 0.05%. It is possible, but we'll never know. Now fast forward to February of 2009, and Paul Vigay, who was another prominent researcher, was also found dead under very bizarre circumstances. The 44-year-old's body was discovered bobbing in the turbulent sea off the coast of Portsmouth, Hants. And what made his death even more puzzling was that he had left behind a series of cryptic passwords on his phone that nobody could ever decipher or figure out. Despite authorities quickly labeling it a suicide, all of his friends and family were very adamant that he was never suicidal. In fact, even the coroner couldn't definitively determine whether it was a suicide or not, and the coroner actually said this: "I cannot say beyond reasonable doubt that yes, Paul has taken his own life. The only person who could tell us what was going on in his mind and what happened that night is sadly not here to tell us." However, perhaps the strangest case of all happened just recently back in 2016. Max Spears, a well-known conspiracy theorist and UFO expert, had made a name for himself by investigating government cover-ups. And in July of that same year, Spears was visiting a close friend in Warsaw, Poland, and had planned to attend a conference on conspiracies and UFOs. But on July 16th, his friend made a shocking discovery. Well, you all know what happens next. Spears was discovered unresponsive on the sofa, having apparently vomited this nasty, viscous black liquid. This gets disturbing quickly. Now, just before he had died, he had actually sent a very chilling text message to his mother that read, "Your boy's in trouble. If anything happens to me, investigate." Now, adding to the mystery, they never did an official autopsy on Spears' body. Pretty strange, right? Especially since he was a very healthy young guy with no health problems in the past. Of course, completely heartbroken and grief-stricken, his mother, bless her heart, demanded answers. The police were not being compliant at all regarding her son's case, and that they refused to release any paperwork to her because she didn't have her son's written permission. She went on to explain this. Max was a very fit man who was in good health, and yet he apparently just died suddenly on a sofa. All I have is a death certificate from the Polish authorities that it was from natural causes, but no post-mortem was done. So how can they tell that? Now, it wasn't until years later, 3 years to be exact, in 2019, after Spears' death, that the authorities would finally rule the official cause, which was drug use and pneumonia. But for Spears' mother and many others and his entire family, the question remained, was this really an accident, or did some nefarious agency consider Spears a huge threat and decided to move forward with silencing him? I mean, his text message to his mother alone should be a significant cause for investigation. I mean, how does that not ring a bell? But why that's not taken more seriously is beyond me. And so, this leads us to the main conspiracy theory regarding these mysterious deaths. It's believed that UFO researchers and conspiracy theorists met their end at the ends of some shadowy organizations, potentially government agencies, or even the infamous Men in Black. Skeptics will argue that people pass away regularly, and it's not uncommon for UFO researchers to succumb to this reality as well, but the odd circumstances and puzzling details of all these cases can't help but seem suspicious. I mean, were these deaths simply a string of coincidences, or is there a more sinister force at play? And lastly, the deaths and circumstances surrounding everyone I mentioned in this video ultimately remains a mystery, and the truth as to what happened to them will probably never, unfortunately, see the light of day. Nothing but respect to all the lives lost in this video. If you guys made it this far into the episode, I want you to all comment down below "death for the truth," which I've used before in a previous video, which is why I picked it again. And if you guys enjoy videos similar to this, where we dive into topics that revolve around the strange, mysterious, and supernatural, then you should totally hit that like and subscribe button because, well, why not? Don't forget, everyone, I love you all, keep an open mind, and I'll catch you all in the very next episode.